is being recorded, and so we will put a copy of that again on our newly created YouTube channel, which is on Harts Limited. So if you want to go straight to that, you can, but again there will be another link on our website to be able to get a copy of this recording. We are here to help you. We are still open. We are still working. We have our staff working from home in the majority of cases, and a very skeleton staff in the office, again practicing the social distancing measures wherever we can. So we are still here to help you. If you've got any problems, please feel free to get in touch with us so that we can help you out through this very, very difficult time. I think things are only going to get worse before they get better, but hopefully that will happen sooner rather than later. Today we're going to cover all those aspects in relation to business support. So I'm going to hand you over to Chris Bentley, who I'm going to now make the presenter, and he's got a short presentation to run through with you. And after that we will take some questions. So, Chris, I've made you the presenter. If you want to take it from here, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's Chris here. Hopefully, you're now seeing the front page of our slide pack.
Yes.
Yeah, I've just been shown by someone on the phone that, yes, we can now see that. So, yes, as Stephen has said, we're here to take you through today the government support packages. But I think the real value will be in answering your questions that might arise, rather than reiterating what you may already have heard or what you may already have read. We'll also add some of our thoughts on what's already been communicated by the government and how you can make best use of that. In terms of questions, we've already received a number. If you do have questions that you would still like to raise, please send them through the chat facility sooner rather than later, so that we have an opportunity to pick up on them at the end of today's presentation. So on that note, I'm going to start going through the presentation that we have. I'm not planning to go through it line by line, but I will pick out the key points. And this presentation will be available alongside the recording afterwards. So, hang on. For some reason, here we are. It's moving on through. For some reason, my computer's moving slowly. Here we are. So, start off with the summary of the measures announced by the government. There's quite a long list of those. I suspect the ones where we're going to get most questions are around the job retention scheme or furlough scheme, the business support for the self-employed, perhaps a bit around the business rates and grant funding, and also the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. And I think if you're not already looking at that, it's something you want to be looking at sooner rather than later. The reason being, the banks have limited resource, which we'll come on to as we get to that part of the presentation. So if I try and move this on again, I'm struggling here with a slideshow that's for some reason taking a very long time to move between slides. So here we are, the job retention scheme. This is where I'm expecting a lot of questions. I suspect many of you may already have looked into it. The key points are up on the screen in front of you at the moment. But I think one of them that's worth pulling out is that you really do want to obtain written consent from employees wherever that is possible. It really should be seen as a necessity. The reason you need that is employment law. It's not financial, it's not tax, it's not going to stop you getting money out of the government. But the concern is that from an employment law perspective, if you've not got the employee's consent, that after this all blows over, That's why we're worried. That's why we sent around the template letters.
Yeah.
The other point that's worth noting is that directors can claim, but if they are doing it, they are still subject to the same restrictions as everyone else, in that they cannot be working during the period of furlough. In practice, that's likely to be quite difficult for many directors. You may have furloughed your staff because you've been shut down, but the question is then, what are the directors doing? It's probably quite easy to get to a position where there is just one director who is working. It's more difficult, unless you're completely closed, to say that that remaining director is not working. Now, if you're thinking that might be yourself in that position as the last remaining director, we then need to think about what you can do and what you cannot do. The guidance that's been issued says that a director's statutory duties would not be considered work for this purpose. That's things like doing the bookkeeping, chasing debts, getting your accounts filed, getting your VAT returns filed. However, if you're going out marketing, if you're going out looking for work, you're working, and therefore you can't be claiming to be furloughed. So I'll move on to deferring tax payments, which is another useful piece of support from the revenue. The biggest deferral here is that there is an automatic deferral of the current quarter's VAT payment. Don't have to apply to the revenue for it. It will happen automatically, and the revenue will not charge you interest on it. The deferral is up until the end of the current tax year, so this time next year. The VAT returns where this applies to are those for the quarters ended 29th of February, 31st of March, or 30th of April. However, a couple of key points are that you have to file your VAT return. I don't know where it says pay the VAT due here. I've just noticed that. It should say file the VAT return as normal. You also need to remember, if you pay by direct debit, to cancel the direct debit with the revenue. That's not us saying the revenue are being useless and taking a belt and braces approach. This is actually what the revenue have asked people to do. So if you do pay by direct debit, cancel your direct debit. Otherwise, the VAT may well come out by accident. Another thing that's just worth noting at that point is other business tax payments are not automatically deferred. The revenue will give time to pay for corporation tax or for pay as you earn, but the automatic deferral is only for VAT. And if anyone does use the VAT MOS, quite niche, I know, that's not deferred either. The other deferral that is automatically out there is self-assessment, so personal tax that is due in July of this year. That payment is deferred automatically until January 2021. If you do go down that route, just remember that you are going to have a bigger tax liability than you expected next January. However, you can plan. It's perhaps more important than ever to get your tax return done early this year, because if you're going to have a bigger than expected payment in January, I'm sure most people would very much appreciate knowing that that tax liability is coming, so that they've got time to plan for it, raise funds. Hopefully the economy will be working a bit more normally by the end of the summer and the autumn, and people will have money to pay that tax. Other reasons why you might want to get your tax return done early this year are if you're expecting a tax repayment because you've overpaid for the tax year 1920. Again, get your tax return done early. We are open, as Stephen has said, ready to work, and we'll be getting everything going for 1920 tax returns from next week. That reason for next week is the Sunday is the 5th of April and the end of the tax year. So we can start filing 1920 tax returns on, from next week. Right. Another area where many of you may well have questions is the government support for the self-employed. Now, again, the key parts of this have been trailed quite widely, both by ourselves and in the press. A common misunderstanding here, though, is that this applies to company directors. It does not. If you are a director of a company, you are not entitled to this support scheme. You might be entitled under the furlough scheme or job retention scheme, which I've mentioned previously, but you're not entitled under the self-employed scheme. The self-employed scheme is for individuals who trade as a sole trader or as a member of a partnership or an LLP. And for these individuals, the support will come directly from HMRC. We understand that the revenue will be undertaking the initial calculation themselves, and that this will be based on your submitted tax returns for the tax years 16, 17, 17, 18 and 18, 19. I think most, if not all people, will have submitted their 18, 19 tax returns already to include their self-employment income. I don't remember us having many people at 31st of January who hadn't, but if there is anyone who's not submitted their 18, 19 tax return, to benefit from this support, you must get your return in by the 23rd of April. The reason for that date is the revenue gave everyone 4 weeks from the date that the scheme was announced to put their affairs in order. When do the revenue expect to start making the payments here? Beginning of June, which isn't ideal because that means that you've probably got 8-9 weeks when cash flow is going to be a real difficulty. There are other things you can do in the meantime, which I'll come back to, but do be mindful that it will take several weeks for these payments to be made, that there is no point in ringing the revenue to apply for them earlier, because the revenue will be doing a lot of the calculation themselves. But it is going to be a very valuable piece of support to those who qualify. Other exclusions are worth mentioning at this point, as well as the company directors who are not entitled under the self-employed scheme. Other common exclusions will be those who have started to be self-employed since the 6th of April 2019. They're a group who really do fall through the cracks. The government are aware of it. I think they're pointing people in that camp in the direction of universal credit at the moment. But those individuals will have to look at other schemes to help them. Other people who will be excluded will be those who have ceased to trade for reasons not related to coronavirus since the 5th of April, and also those who don't intend to restart afterwards. The revenue here, the reason for that is the revenue is trying to limit this support to those who need it and whose businesses have been disrupted. So of course there is also an exclusion that if you've not suffered a loss, you won't be getting support here. HMRC again will be contacting you if they believe that you may be eligible, rather than you needing to contact HMRC. The bit that individuals can do here is to log in to their own self-assessment accounts online, the government gateway account, and just check HMRC has the correct contact details for them. we don't know whether we will be contacted as agents or not. It's still very much a work in progress. So the last part in terms of the furloughing and self-employed schemes are just a quick bit on personal service companies. Personal service companies, for those who are not aware, are typically husband and wife companies or main earner companies where someone is a contractor. The contractor provides their services through a limited company. That limited company may or may not be caught by IR35. I'm not going to go into the IR35 rules at this point. And that individual is essentially self-employed but works through a limited company. Now, in those circumstances, because you've got a limited company, you are not eligible under the self-employed support scheme. However, the director may be eligible under the furlough scheme. And if they are eligible under the furlough scheme, it will be for the PAYE element of their income only. Unfortunately, most of these people take the majority of their income in the form of dividends, and there is no support available from the government currently through either the furlough scheme or the self-employed scheme for those who take dividends. The furlough will apply only to the PAYE payments, which is typically somewhere between £8,500 and £12,500 per year. That said, someone who is working through a personal service company, quite often both halves of the couple will be directors. I can't see any reason why one of them cannot be furloughed. It's probably also much easier in the case of a personal service company for the remaining director to be furloughed. If you're in an industry which has largely shut down, where businesses have laid off all of their contractors because they're the easiest people to cut, you may well be in a position where there is currently no point looking for work. You're not going to be marketing. There's no point looking for work. You're not working. The only things you will be doing are pulling up your books and records together, getting us to do your accounts, chasing your debts potentially. Those are all permitted for someone who is on furlough. The main benefit people who are in this situation will receive is through the VAT deferral, which applies, and through the self-assessment deferral. That's for the tax on your dividends. So moving on now very quickly to sick pay support. All small and medium-sized entities will, for the duration of this outbreak, it's been announced that these companies will be able to reclaim sick pay from the government. Sick pay here is going to be payable to individuals who have coronavirus, are self-isolating because they think they might have coronavirus, or are self-isolating because someone in the family might have coronavirus. And they've also relaxed the rules over what requirements you need in terms of fit notes from doctors. We don't yet know how the rebates are coming through. I suspect in practice that will be a smaller amount back than people will receive back through, say, the furlough scheme. So if I then move on to business rates and grants, there's two schemes operating in this area. The first one is for companies or businesses, should I say, in the retail, hospitality and leisure companies. Now, pretty much all of these businesses have been shut down compulsorily. So the government recognises these businesses will have been harmed more than others, at least in the first round of economic disruption. And for these businesses, there is a business rates holiday for the whole of the 2021 financial year, the terms of which are on the slides. There are also cash grants for certain businesses in these sectors. these are limited by the rateable value of the premises. The smallest premises will get a smaller grant, medium-sized premises will get a larger grant, and the largest premises won't get anything at all. Now, the local councils administer business rates, and the onus is on the local councils to contact those businesses who are eligible for both this grant and for the general grant to the smallest of businesses, which I will come on to in a moment. Just going to skip over the next slide for nursery businesses because I think it's probably of limited application, but happy to talk to anyone who it is relevant to. So the second set of grants are to those businesses that pay either little or no business rates because they qualify for small business rates relief, or because their rateable value of their premises is under £12,000 and they pay no business rates whatsoever. So in practice, this is going to be companies whose premises have a rateable value of less than £15,000. And these businesses are eligible for a one-off grant of £10,000. The practical points here are that if you pay a service charge rather than business rates to your landlord, that the grant may well come through to your landlord. In those cases, it's worth speaking to your landlord, contacting your landlord and seeing if they are receiving a grant. If they are, ask about whether it should be passed on to you. It shouldn't really be the landlord's windfall. If you're operating the business, you're the one suffering. The landlord probably expects you to still pay the rent, and yet the landlord may well be in receipt of this grant. Another one that we have come across is if you're currently not paying business rates because the rateable value of the premises is less than £12,000, it is worth double checking that your business's name is actually registered with the council as the payer of the business rates. Reason being is that if you've not expected to pay and you've not received a bill, would you have chased it? There is a possibility, and we've come across at least one instance where this is the case, where a previous tenant's name is still registered with the council. Yes, there are anti-fraud things in place, but you don't want the grant to go to a previous tenant rather than to yourself. The councils were aware that Cheshire East and Stockport councils have set up a web page to collect ratepayers' bank details for those who don't pay rates at the moment or who pay by means other than direct debit, so that they can administer the grants. I think other councils will be doing similar, although if you are in another local authority, you'll need to check with your own local authority. Don't start giving your bank details to other people in relation to this. We are aware that there are scams operating in this area. So the next very important area is the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. Get onto this if you've not already done so. These are the loans which the government is providing through the banks to provide extra money to small businesses and larger businesses to provide extra cash flow through these difficult times. Now, you may have seen on the news last night bashing the banks for not getting these loans out to people quickly. Our advice is very much that if there is any possibility that you may need one of these loans, to get onto your bank or another lender as soon as is possible. The reason for this is the banks are essentially acting here as the business doctors. The NHS has a very widely publicised lack of ventilators. The banks have a finite number of individuals who are trained and qualified to administer these loans. Those bank managers are the business doctors. You want to get into those business doctors while there's still capacity and before the system melts down. So any possibility that you need it, would strongly advise that you look at this as soon as possible. In terms of what we've seen so far is that the banks will expect businesses to investigate other sources of funding before the government-backed scheme. Now, that might be that you can raise a loan on ordinary terms with your own bank. For example, if you're a business that has assets such as property, the bank will look to lend against the property first before it puts a loan in under the government scheme. So strangely, those businesses that would normally find it harder to access funding will find it easier to access funding under the government scheme. That doesn't mean that those businesses with properties, for example, shouldn't look at this. It just means that they should be aware that the bank may require them to raise money against the property or against other assets before going into the government scheme. It's also been confirmed now that for loans up to $250,000, the banks will not be seeking personal guarantees. And a small piece of good news that we're aware of is that many of the peer-to-peer lenders are actually being quite helpful here, quite friendly, and are waiving exit charges and other charges to enable businesses to raise additional funds more easily. So again, the scheme is open. It's open with all the main banks. There are accredited providers. If you Google the scheme, the full list is there. Get onto it quickly, but also if you've got existing debt, speak to your bank about things like having a repayment holiday, putting it on interest only for 3 to 6 months. That could well be something that unlocks cash flow and the bank can deal with quickly and easily, meaning you don't need to get involved with the application process, potentially needing to bring your accounts up to date quickly to do cash flow projections. That said, if the bank does need you to do that, we are open for business. We've got people in who are able to do this work quickly. We are able to help you. I'm not going to dwell on the facility for larger firms that's currently up on the screen, but it is there should there be any large businesses on this listening to this recording. So a few pieces of further support that are perhaps a bit wider in application. The revenue is open to time to pay arrangements for pay-as-you-earn, corporation tax. That, as I say, has already been automatically deferred. So the phone number to ring the revenue if you've missed your tax payment, or you might miss your next tax payment. The classic one here will be the pay-as-you-earn due on the 22nd of this month, or your corporation tax that was due at the beginning of this month. Ring that number and try and get through to HMRC, but don't get too upset if you are unable to get through. They're having their usual high call volumes. We think they have put extra staff in place, but we're aware that a lot of clients have struggled to get through. And I'm sure that if you speak to them next week rather than this week, it will not be the end of the world. Commercial tenants, it's also been announced here that if you're unable to pay your rent, that landlords will not be allowed to evict you. You'll have to pay the rent at a later date, but you're not going to get kicked out in the short term. There's also, again, fairly narrow application, but coming back to those personal service companies, those who are working through personal service companies and are operating in the private sector, you may well have been aware, or hopefully were aware, that the rules were due to change on the 6th of April this year to make your engager liable for deciding on whether PAYE should be applied. Those rules have been put back a year to assist with the current difficulties. So, big question is, what should I as business owner be doing now? Looking at business loans, looking at cash flow, looking at staffing. Those are probably the key ones. But as I come down the bullet points on what's available at the moment, top of the list, yes, business loans are available now for immediate help. The quicker you get your application in, the quicker the money can start flowing. The job retention scheme, the furlough scheme, two parts of this. First of all, if you can furlough your employees because you have no work for them, do this as soon as possible, because that will enable you to start recovering money from the government. The current estimate on when money will be available from the government is that claims will start to be processed, their portal will be up and running at the end of April. Hopefully that means money can start to flow in for the time that people need to pay their April wage and salary bills. Fingers crossed, but the earlier you can reduce your own wage bills, if you have underemployed staff, the better. Local authorities and business rates, yes, check that all the ducks are in a line for you to get that repayment, and the local authority will be in touch. VAT, if you've got an upcoming VAT payment, yes, you must still file your VAT return. A lot of people have asked us, do I have to file my VAT return? The answer is categorically yes, but don't worry about the payment, because that is automatically deferred and the deferral is interest free. Other tax payments, back to VAT, if you normally get a repayment, the revenue will be making repayments as normal. And if you have monthly VAT returns, the VAT deferral will apply to 3 individual months. So the February, the March and the April returns. Other tax payments, yes, speak to HMRC if you're in a position where you are unable to pay those for cash flow reasons. And then if I move on to wider considerations that are outside the government's own support packages, it's all about maximising your cash flow, holding on to cash flow and only paying those bills which you absolutely have to. In other words, your staff, to make sure that you have staff available on hand when business can restart. So first among those, credit control. If you're not already actively collecting your debtors, we strongly recommend you do that. Yes, there will be people who are struggling to pay, but there will also be people out there who are doing very well from this. Perhaps they're in the medical supply chain, for example. Those people should have no problem with paying you. Review your cash flow, look at that closely, think about when the pinch points might come. It's far better to be on the front foot and know when there's likely to be a problem so that you can get funding in place. Far less stressful than realising the week before that you're going to be unable to make the monthly salary bill, unable to pay your landlord, for example. Invoicing promptly. Yes, we're all busy. Yes, we will all concentrate on getting our clients serviced, but we also need to remember that it's in our interest as business owners to invoice our customers. The sooner it's invoiced, and consider putting an interim bill in place, the sooner you're likely to get paid. You might be able to review payment timetables with your customers. If they're used to 60 days, are you able to reduce that to 30, or are your customers going to insist on 90? That will depend on the industry. Are there any overheads you can cut? costs that don't need to be paid for the short term. Services that have been good to have in the good times, but you can switch off because they're nice to have rather than necessary. For businesses that carry stock, in most cases, you're likely to be selling less over the coming weeks and months. So why not order less and run down your stocks and use that as a way to generate cash? I'm mentioning furloughing employees. Similar to that, if there's an activity that you can outsource, that may well be a way to cut the bills, or even at least get 30 days credit on that service. Talk to your banks, whether that's about repayment holidays or whether it's about raising additional finance. Equally, talk to your landlord. Even if that's your pension fund, it may well be worth putting a rent deferral in place because that provides the business with additional cash flow through that difficult period. Most businesses should be looking at that, and the banks in turn are expecting to provide landlords with room, manoeuvrability on their lending, because everyone is well aware that businesses will be asking their landlords for rent payment deferrals or holidays. But also look at your insurance policies. Are you able to claim for business interruption? It's quite possible that certainly some broader scope insurance policies will include cover for business disruption due to pandemics. It's worth checking. And then the last one there is continue marketing. Might seem counterintuitive at the moment, particularly if you're looking down on this, but disruption always brings opportunities for those businesses that survive. And if we all work closely, we maximize our chances of surviving in the same way that social distancing maximizes the chances of those more vulnerable people around us and their chances of surviving. We all want to maximize the chance of our business surviving the pandemic. Those that are left after will have opportunities. Do your marketing so that you're there to take those when the climate changes and those opportunities arise. So that's the end of the presentation. And you should now see pictures of myself and Stephen. And at this point, at this point, I'm going to hand back to Stephen. Yes, before going into questions.
Okay, thanks, Chris, for that. A couple of points that I will just update you on, which are happening very, very recently, literally today, is on the business interruption loan scheme. We are expecting an announcement from the Chancellor today or tomorrow in relation to some of these rules, because we do realise the banks are behaving pretty appallingly as has been in the past, and we have seen interest rates as much as 30% that they're trying to charge. I believe there's going to be an announcement today which is going to force the banks to comply with the spirit of what's been expected of them. So watch this space. It's either today or tomorrow. We're hoping to see something on that. In relation to business rates, we've already had 1 or 2 clients who've gone onto the local authority websites, and they have already applied to have some money back. It might be worth just going on, checking on your local authority just to make sure that you don't actually need to do anything, rather than waiting for them to come to you. And another specific point, if you do own some property and maybe you're letting it out for whatever reason and the tenants are not there. For instance, we have a number of clients who let property out for students. A lot of the universities have gone back, have finished, and therefore your houses may be empty. Check your insurance cover for that, because your property will now be empty for more than the 30 days. So you may well want to have a look at that as well. Moving on to some of the questions. I'm going through the email questions first of all, and then I'll come on to the chat box. So first question is, what benefit for husband and wife directors, employees of a private limited company that they also own? I think we've covered that already.
That's right, Steve.
Yeah.
Stephen, it's Chris. I've just been through and I've sort of almost summarised them in terms of what we've got there.
Yeah.
If you, I was going to say, I'm quite happy to go through those. Yes, we've covered that one. That husband and wife direct employees of a limited company. Yes, it's the job retention scheme. You may well be able to furlough. One of you, I would expect you can furlough. The second one is going to take a bit more thought, and it will depend on what you're actually doing. Similar to that, I've also had a question about if I'm a company director on a minimum salary and dividend, what help am I entitled to? The answer is it's the furlough scheme. You're not entitled to anything on your dividends whatsoever. It's the furlough scheme only. That's come up several times overall. There's also a question about company directors, who is and who is not self-employed. A company director is not entitled to claim under the self-employed scheme. The self-employed scheme is only for people who trade as a sole trader or as a partner in an LLP. A company director can only claim under the furlough scheme. There is a hold there for people who take their money out through dividends. We're aware of that, and we're hoping that the government will plug some of these cracks in the scheme in due course. But at the moment, there is a problem. The other question I've got in that area is, can a sole director of a business continue to try and keep everything going, like email, updates, administration, social media, and also furlough himself? That will depend what those updates are. Social media and things like that, I would think that's probably marketing. Updating your customers is probably marketing as well. Other administration, like doing the books and collecting the debts, getting your accounts done, that's acceptable. I'm going to move on now to the questions, about for the self-employed, purely for the self-employed. So someone who is able to claim under the self-employed scheme, those individuals can continue to work. There's a difference there. However, there is a caveat to that, in that you'll only get support under the self-employed scheme to the extent that you've suffered a loss. So if you are self-employed and are able to continue to work, you should continue to work. That's the policy behind all of the government's thinking, but you will only get support for the amount you've lost. So if your income was £2,000 a month historically, and it's now £1,000 a month, the expectation is that your grant will be £1,000 a month, because you're still able to work for your £1,000 a month. That is a key distinction, though, between the furlough scheme and the self-employed scheme. And I will reiterate once again that a company director is not self-employed for this basic purpose. The company director can only go on the furlough scheme. Moving on now to the business loans. I've got one person who's come in and said they've got a flat refusal for a business interruption loan. I understand the government are going to intervene on this. Do you have any more info? The answer is this is developing all the time. There is a lot of pressure that the government are putting on the banks to make this easier for businesses. As Stephen has said, we're expecting an announcement today. In the interim, it is worth that business exploring whether they can raise finance with the bank through conventional routes, conventional loans, overdrafts, asset-backed lending, etc. Government grants in relation to rate relief, full details are on the internet, but to put it very simply, it's those businesses of any kind who have premises with a rateable value of less than £15,000. They're all entitled to grants, as are businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors with premises with a rateable value up to £51,000. I had a question about the deferral of tax and whether that will carry interest. The answer is the automatic VAT deferral for the current quarter's VAT liability. The government have expressly said that the deferral of tax will not carry interest. Similarly, the automatic deferral of the July 2020 payment on account of personal tax will not carry interest. But in all other cases, the government has not made a similar announcement, so you should assume that interest is chargeable. It's currently about 2.75% on late paid tax, and that includes PAYE and corporation tax. I've had a question in about an employee who is currently self-isolating on SSP, and that at the end of the SSP 14 days, he wants to be furloughed as he wants to shield his family. Whether he can request this. The regulations we've seen certainly indicate that individual at the end of the SSP should be back at work. We also understand that there is no right to be furloughed, although most employers, if they have a request from someone who wants to be furloughed and they can lose that individual, it would be common sense to allow that individual to be furloughed. But if that employee is needed at work, then we don't think there is any reason why that individual has to be furloughed. The government wants the furlough scheme as a way to keep people in work in the longer term. It should also be checked. Anything around the employment law side should also be checked with HR consultants, employment law consultants. And then the final question I have is someone who's mentioned that they had no profit in each year in their first 2 years as sole trader. Unfortunately, if you had no profit, because the revenue is going to base the self-employed grants on your submitted tax returns, unfortunately, in that case, we don't see there being any support coming through from that side. There may be things like the small business rates relief grants, business interruption loans, etc. But nothing through the self-employed scheme if you had no profits. And at that point, I'm going to hand back over to Stephen, who will have picked up the questions that have arisen during the course of the webinar itself.
Yeah, okay, so we've got a question about rateable value was set in March 18 at 54,500. We've appealed against it, but the process is taking on average 18 months. And we are still awaiting an answer. We hope that we set below the 51k. Will we get the 25k retrospectively? That's a very good question, and the answer is I hope you will do. There's no reason why you shouldn't do. If the rates were below that for that particular time, you should be eligible for that grant. The problem is you're going to have to wait for it, and we don't know what the process will be once this scheme is finished. So it's unfortunately, we're going to have to watch this space on that one. Chris, I don't know if you've got any update on that.
No, I would agree with you, Stephen, because it's the rateable value is under dispute. It's going to have to wait for the dispute to be resolved.
Sure. Okay, next question. I've contacted our bank who have flatly refused any support whatsoever. However, we are in the hospitality industry. The banks have been taking a very strict line initially on this because they can see that your business has suffered and they don't know where the outcome is going to be on it. However, you should go back to them and say, look, we are suffering because of this. We had a viable business beforehand and we don't have a viable business at the moment as a result of the Covid-19 pandemic, but we will have afterwards. That's really what you have to prove to them to show that you did have a viable business before. They should be able to offer you some sort of support. As you say, we're expecting announcements either today or tomorrow where they're hopefully going to relax some of these rules. So again, it's watch this space. But there are a number of lenders who are out there. If you don't have any joy with your first lender, there are up to 40 people who are on the lenders list. So it may be worth contacting somebody else as well. Next question, will the slides be available after the meeting? Yes, they will be. It will be, again, we'll send out a link to that, and they'll be available from our website as well. Next question, is there a limit on the self-employed scheme? Is that the 50,000? So if self-employed profits are over 50,000, will the scheme apply? Yeah, basically they're taking the average of the annual profits over the previous 3 years. If that's over 50,000, unfortunately, you're not going to get anything. The problem comes therefore if you've got maybe earning 55,000 on average, and now your profits have dropped to 20,000. Unfortunately, you're not going to be entitled to anything. The same with the partnership. If you both the partners earning 51,000 each, and again, that's the average for the last 3 years, and it drops off a cliff for whatever reason, unfortunately, you fall between the cracks on that one, and it's an arbitrary limit which they've set. Much the same as it is for child benefit. If your earnings go above £50,000 for one person in the household, then you lose it all. You can have 2 people earning 49,000 and they get the child benefit. It's just one of those limits which the government has set. Not a lot we can do about that one, I'm afraid. The next question is, if you're getting SSP because you're self-isolating, presumably you can't also be furloughed. Can you move off SSP and onto furlough if you are self-isolating? Chris, do you want to answer that one?
My understanding is that the answer is no. If you're on SSP, you stay on SSP until the end of the period of SSP, and only at that point could you be furloughed.
Okay. Next question. Is there any grant available for sole director companies based at home not paying business rates? I don't believe that there is, because you don't have a business premises and you're not entitled to small business rates relief. So I don't believe there is any grant available to you, I'm afraid. Couple of comments to say continue marketing, and on that, and yes, we agree, you've got to continue to do that at this time. It's a good opportunity whilst you're quiet, as long as you're not being furloughed and you're sole director, that you continue to get out there and market your services, because bear in mind this isn't going to last forever. Well, hopefully not, and we can all carry on back to normal at some point in the future. Next question. We're in a startup phase. Can we make use of the business interruption loan scheme for supporting our running costs and engaging someone to help with marketing? And that's a difficult one, because you had to prove that you had a good case beforehand and you've actually lost out as a result of it. You may well find it difficult to get somebody to loan you the money under the scheme. So again, it's going to be a question of speaking to your bank, seeing what they can do for you. Next question is, Harts do my payroll? Thank you very much. Will Harts be submitting the furlough information to HMRC on our behalf? And will Harts charge for this? Well, first of all, we're waiting to see what the information will be that they will actually need, because there's supposed to be a portal being set up. The latest information I've seen is that it will be up and running around about the 21st of this month. Whether they stick to that or not, I don't know. So we've got to wait and see what information will be done, what information they will be needed. But in theory, it should just be normally part of the payroll cost, but we will have to review that depending on the amount of work that they're actually going to be needed. But we will help wherever we can, certainly. And will Harts handle the HMRC furlough payment if they handle the pay as you earn? Yes, we can help you do that as well. And next question, can a self-employed person of pensionable age claim? I don't see why not. If you are a self-employed person and you're losing out as a result of the COVID pandemic, I can't see why you shouldn't be able to claim as a result and be eligible for this self-employment support. Next question, if a company director only pays himself salary once or twice each year under pay as you earn, how would the salary be calculated for the furlough scheme? That's a very good question, but if it's under the annual payment, the payment will have gone through in March and will be based on the payment at that point, presumably. Chris, have you got any update on that?
I haven't seen this one looked at specifically, but I would have thought it would be the going to the naturally varying pay bracket,
Yes. Yeah.
in which case it's based on the higher of March in the previous year and the average over 12 months.
Yeah. Okay. When will the payments of the small business rate relief grants likely be? It was announced yesterday on the briefing that they'd already given 12 billion to the local authorities to be able to distribute this money. So we expect that to start happening fairly soon. Obviously, they've got a lot of staff off, so they're going to be inundated with having to make these payments out. So again, we expect this to happen fairly soon. So just keep an eye out on that. And the next question, which I think is the final question, is there a grant for loss of business rather than a loan for resultant loss of revenue? It depends if you're self-employed or not. If you're self-employed and you've got loss of profit, then you can make the claim. There is no grant for a loss of turnover. It's all going to be down to profitability as a self-employed person. As an employee, you've got the furlough position, and that's about it, really. If you're really struggling and you fall between the two stools as well, there is also the universal credit, which you can have a go at, but you've all seen in the press about the huge waiting times that are there for that. But it might be, if you have to go down that route, that is another option to you. That's the final question that we've had so far. So hopefully you've all found this extremely useful. Thanks to Chris Bentley, Tax Director here at Harts, for giving the presentation today. If you've got any further questions, please feel free to email those into us or give us a call. We're still around, either working from home or, as I say, skeleton staff in the office. We will be putting this recording up onto the website, so you can be able to click on the link and get access to that. And a big thank you for joining us on this call today. Hopefully we'll be putting out another webinar next week with any further updates, and we have one or two ideas planned for the future for you to be able to keep in touch with us over this very difficult period. So all that remains to me to say is, look, stay safe and look after yourselves, and if there's anything you need from us, any further information you help from us, please give us a call. Thanks very much indeed. Goodbye.